is Landed in Leadership and Enlightenment, a podcast where the guests are exceptional humans that have faced their fears, pressed into their best selves, growing into a way they can help their communities, creating opportunities, and sharing their secrets and their tips that they learned along the way. Without further ado, here we are, my friends. Have a great time today and enjoy Leadership and Enlightenment. John, this is going to be a fun conversation, my friend. I love the fact that we met actually on Instagram. This is the first time that I've actually had a podcast with a new friend out of Instagram. Usually it's LinkedIn that I'm making my new connections. How's your day going, bud?
I guess that makes us Insta friends, right?
Yeah, right. There you go.
Yeah, day's going well. Yeah, it's a grind as always,
Yeah, it generally is in our world, in the idea of getting out there and creating that right set of mind every day and that frame of mind that you're in. And that's what you and I really have in common when we start to get into our conversations. And we both see this idea of mental momentum as our strongest suits. It's really what I, key in on every day of myself, is knowing that what's going on in the noggin here is really kind of pushing me through that day. And if it's unbalanced or unsettled, you can expect that the results are going to feel the same way. So it's really about that kind of work. You have some outstanding things that have happened in your life. One is a TED Talks, which I watched and just walked away from changed. And so that's something to me that's just outstanding. But I'm going to give you the floor, my friend. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you want to come from and how we got here?
Geez, that's a big question. Where do I begin?
Yeah, right.
I guess, professionally, the easiest narrative to draw is I worked in the investment banking industry. I wasn't one of those evil bankers who tried to take down the world economy, but I did work in those organizations. I primarily, I've done a lot of different things throughout my banking career, front, middle, and back office, but primarily I was running large finance and operations functions for about 23 years or so, depending on how you count. But did that around the globe. I lived in Asia, lived in Europe, my hometown of New York City. Really had enough of corporate life. It probably wasn't really the cloth I was meant to be cut from, but it was a good run. I was able to develop myself quite a bit, was able to lead people and really get into what leadership meant to me. And that really segued me into what I do today full time. What I've been doing since 2019 is leadership development training and coaching. And I first started dabbling in that really as a hobbyist while I was still in banking back in 2014. And we could talk a little bit about that as we move forward, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the conversations of exceptional individuals that I end up having is that there's something that kind of moves you through your life from this ideal of let me accomplish and create to allowing something else in your existence to create with you and to really, jump into that, whatever that is. And some of us have, achieved that proverbial top of the ladder, like you did running your financial company. And I would say, coming out of my hotel career, it was a lot of that ideal of like, you're the winner and others have to lose to create this succession in your mind of success. And then when I peeled out, it kind of felt like the rings in a tree. Like I was always in the right place at the right time, but I wasn't really taking advantage of that. What drove you to take those steps to make a move out of a successful financial career into that?
Yeah. I'm a big believer that you're not defined by what you do. And I never felt defined by what I did. There was obviously some preconceived notions when people ask you what you do and you say you work in investment banking. Some gravitate and said, oh, wow, you're one of me, or I've always wanted to do that. How can I do it? Or they, made assumptions about you. You were greedy, you were this, you were that. Everyone has their own preconceived notions, right? Somewhere in between lays the truth for everyone. But for me, I never felt I was a stereotypical investment bank, executive, even though I played that role on TV, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And I always kind of knew I was meant to do something different. I probably started off knowing I was meant to do something different. I think growing up, I probably envisioned myself lots of different things, a rock star and different things, of course, as we grow up. But, more seriously, as I got into my higher education, I probably saw myself as a history teacher someday, which could be any more different than being a investment bank executive, right? But I had a great run and I was able to differentiate within my career as very much a right brain thinker in a left brain industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no regrets. I really enjoyed my career, but I kind of knew that there was another direction I wanted to evolve in. And corporate life in general became very political, especially the more senior you get, kind of starts to suck your soul dry, at least for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So
and is it really like, is it the circumstance that sucks our soul dry, or is it us that allows that to happen. I mean, I felt like along the way, it was a slow progression where I was changing to fit my circumstance as a strategy and giving away some of that essence that was within me and realizing like later now I look back and I'm like, I did that. I did that because I was a strategist and I didn't understand any other strategies. And this seemed like the way to go. And then something dings inside of you and you realize you're walking around saying one thing, but on the inside, it's not the same message. You're upset. It's not in this place that you expected it to be or whatever it is. And as humans, we get out there and we start stretching back into it. And then we find like we weren't really scratching these innate talents that we had. And those talents to us, they weren't revenue drivers the way we saw them. They were hobbies and the way that we would, present ourselves outside of our serious job. And then we realize that, oh my, these are actually talents that I have that actually can create revenue if I'm fully invested into them. And I'm not working them like a job, but I'm seeing them as my life. And that took you along into this next step of being a coach and helping people by using your words and your knowledge. Tell us where the journey ended or it landed, because I mean, a TEDx talk to me is really one of those pinnacle times in your life that you could speak to.
Yeah, that was a good kind of pivot point. I guess a quote that I love, and I do love quotes. People know me, you're probably tired of hearing me use quotes, but I just feel that they're great hacks to convey your values. And it really is around value alignment. And the quote I love attributed to Mark Twain is, find a job you love and you'll never have to work another day in your life, right? And that is the idea. So few of us, far too few of us are in that position where we can actually do what we feel is value aligned for us. Something I preach critically important to the corporate leaders I work with today, especially with the younger generations. If you want to lower the attrition rate, the revolving door of the Gen Z coming and going, because they're nowhere near as sticky and committed to the corporate hierarchy as we were, as I certainly was, then you'd better find a way to make them values aligned. And the things I'm mentioning were a kind of misalignment of values. As you
Mm,
climb the political, corporate hierarchy, if you're not perfectly value aligned, even though you may have found success by exerting your own individualism, at some point you're going to be parroting talking points from someone else that you don't necessarily believe in. And that's where your soul starts to kind of shrink on you.
phew.
So yes, that was a large kind of part of my story that really drove me to pivot. Started my business in 2019, and yes, the TEDx talk did become a new pivot point for me. Something that was always, I guess you might say, on my bucket list. It was certainly something I had ambition for. We were speaking earlier. You speak to the universe, and somehow it speaks back to you. You don't know how or when, but interestingly, I never applied for a TEDx talk, but as it turned out, a very close friend of mine who I did my MBA with became very involved with TEDx, and she founded the TEDx in Catawba down in Hickory, North Carolina. So very kindly invited me to be part of her
Is that incredible?
inaugural panel, and yeah, that's how my journey to TEDx.
But there's so much more underneath that, because from the outside looking in, did you manifest this on a daily basis, writing it down? Probably not. This was just
No,
something that was within your inside of you that was dreaming for it. And that actually created the circumstance. This is something that I think is a real big signal for those that are listening, looking for this idea of like, who am I? What am I supposed to do? It's those small whispers, those callings inside of you that challenge you and put you in these places of fear and, and ask you to go out and find a way through it. And when you actually do and end up in this place, there's this percentage in it. I haven't quite figured out what the number is, but some of it's us, some of it's not us. And we can really appreciate that part. This is where I start to get into the idea of the program's title, Leadership Enlightenment, is that as you're telling your story, it's obvious to the audience and myself that there's something driving you into your life that maybe even a bit outside of yourself, and that you've found that you're centered around that more than you're worried about what the world's saying to you every day and how they feel about it.
Yeah, the interesting part for me was TEDx was always in my mind, but it was never top of mind. I'd never really prioritized it. It was just one of those things that had occurred to me. Was what was more a top line priority for me that I still hadn't driven forward was to write a book. And it's one of those things. I'll get to it someday. We all have some days in mind, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing for me was TEDx was an ambition, but not something I ever really focused on. But having delivered the TEDx, it's finally enabled my focus to start writing my first book. And that's what I'm knee deep in right now. That would not have happened had it not been for the TEDx. I'd still just have that, somewhere in the back burner, and it could have remained there forever.
Yeah.
So life unfolds for you, but you kind of have to surrender to the way the universe enables your journey for you, right?
Well, there's a bigger story behind TEDx, right? I mean, there was a reason that you moved into that world. Can you talk a little more to that and how you ended up there and why you're writing the book?
In what way do you mean? In my personal
Well,
narrative
I
for
mean, like there's a drive in you to help people and to go there. And what are you sharing in this book and how did you get to this place where you found that information, like we all deal with this idea of being an imposter. It's just a fact until our audience or the people around us that take the information see it as a point of reference, and then they realize like this is something that's very valuable to me. And then we start to feed off of that, is realizing like, oh, maybe again, I'm being guided by something that I have to trust. And I'm not going to be this person all the time. In my mind, I need to be before I say something. And to write a book is a big thing.
Yeah, so it is interesting in that respect. I think the thing I bring to leadership development, training, and coaching isn't unique, but it is, somewhat different than the norm. Many in this space are, in this because they're certified coaches. They grew up in human resources world, a learning and development world. I didn't grow up in any of that. I engaged closely with partners in those spaces. But really where this crystallized for me was being a leader of large organizations. I managed hundreds of people around the globe, different cultures, different generations, the whole nine. And what became most interesting to me as my career evolved was the people agenda and
Hmm.
how to navigate that. I kind of alluded to it earlier while I was based in Poland with one of the banks I was working with back in 2014. I took an opportunity to join a volunteer assignment working with an NGO in South Africa.
Oh,
So I did partner closely with my learning development department, and I developed a bespoke curriculum, really essentially, which became a leadership development curriculum. Spent about 3 months doing that remotely, and then I delivered that program on the ground in Pretoria for 5 days in 2014. That's where things really came together for me. I started doing this sort of as a hobbyist between 2014 and 2019 when I finally founded my own business. Now, bear in mind, I had no clear vision that I would be running a business like this someday. I think it had crossed my mind, but even when I left banking in 2018, I was hoping I wouldn't go back to corporate life. I knew there might be options that are too secure and attractive to say no to, and I was started being half-hearted about even finding them because I didn't want to be in that position. But I still didn't know that this is what I'd be doing. It sort of fell in my lap serendipitously. And because of all that backstory, it obviously resonated immediately. And I said, okay, here's my opportunity to go in a new direction.
yeah, for sure. I think though, again, mirroring from the outside that, you had this really like the first part of your life, you really work hard to understand who you want to be in your second effort, right? And how you apply yourself to that. And there's so much that you can take away from putting your head down and learning that world that we say, that 8 to 10 o'clock world, and what that means to us before we get here. And then you can see the benefits of that when you're in the life that you're in now. You realize like these were all not mistakes. Everything about this was a pathway to bring you somewhere that you needed to be. And that's not necessarily to make money. It's to shine this bigger light, to be this influence around yourself by example that others can actually grow from. And when we start to feed into that, it feels to us like we're not in control, coming out controlling worlds. But I think that's really the work, is becoming comfortable with letting that part happen for yourself and not necessarily trying to define what your goal sets look like for success, but allow that internal feeling, and it goes up and down, but to allow it to become a consistent and something that like you said earlier. I mean, as much as it's cliche, if you're enjoying what you're doing, it doesn't become work anymore. It becomes this passion project that you're involved in, and it's growing out of you exponentially in a way that you can't even control. Next thing you know, you've got a friend that aligns you in a TEDx talk, and then you're telling your story, and that story starts to resonate, and everything about not knowing whether you could do this or not starts to wash away. And you realize, like, really the work was facing that part of yourself every day, not what others would say, but what you're saying to yourself.
Yeah. And it really comes back to what I'd said earlier. It's about values alignment. Doing a job that you love doing and having it feel like it's not work is because you feel values aligned. You're
Yeah.
purposeful, right?
Yeah.
And that is what had become increasingly lost the more senior I became in the corporate structure. I
A lot
think
of
you
us do that.
can find a way to succeed in that at more junior levels to a large
Yeah.
extent. But the more senior you get, the more you have to play the corporate game, the more you have to, speak someone else's script, so to speak, right?
Yeah, you have to, that has to start to fit your ultimate personality in life and who you are. I mean, as I rose in my executive career too, I found I wasn't actually involved in the things that I loved to do when I was growing to get there. Had nothing to do with the events business anymore. I didn't really have any clients that I was operating events for. I was more worried about the department and its physical appearance and furniture, how it operated with the other departments of the hotel in a way that was efficient and, that was creating a profit. And before you know it, that thing you love, that touch with people or that organization that you're helping community around, it starts to dissipate. And I realized like a lot of my input when I'm in the world is just grounding. I'm in a place where I bring the center to wherever I'm at. I last employment before I got into this, enjoyed that because it was very beneficial for them. But
Hmm.
I didn't necessarily realize that there was a value behind that until I went out into my own world and started to explore that. I mean, I've been using this analogy lately. Like when I was in my corporate career, I saw it like I was shining this flashlight at something, and everything around the flashlight I could see I wanted. And that was the gold in the room that you're trying to get to. And you lose focus of the light. You're just trying to get to this money because you think that's what it is. But when you find you're a complete passion about something, now all of a sudden you're shining the spotlight over everything, and it just becomes the initiative of the spotlight. And then revenue generates behind it to fulfill and support it. So it's just this ideal of moving away from trying to prove to others that you've done something and moving into proving to yourself that you're living within this place that you can feel is your balance and your flow.
And I think that's a great point you raise, is that when money is the point, something is off, right? And for me, and I speak personally, and I don't mean this to disparage anybody. I have a lot of very close friends and obvious colleagues from the investment banking industry. But as an industry, a lot of the value is money. A lot of the reason people are there are for money. Many of them do it because they figure they can get their nest egg to do something that they are more passionate about.
Hmm.
For others, maybe money is the point. Maybe money is a core value. Understanding your core values is critical. Money is not a core value for me, and maybe it is for some, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you
No,
need to
nothing at all.
understand what your values are, and then find something that fulfills them. Money. If money is the point, then maybe that's not where you want to be for many, right? And that certainly was the
Right.
case for me. So, money is a solution to a problem. We need to fulfill our basic needs. We need to be able to pay the bills, and those bills seem to
Yeah.
be getting higher and higher in the
Well,
current environment. But yeah.
yeah, it's the energy behind the efforts. It's like you said, it's the fuel, the gasoline. And so I want a lot of money. I am not opposed to having money by any means
Makes
whatsoever.
life easier. Yeah,
I've just decided to readjust my way of expanding from always focus on how to make money. And this is why I'm making the decision I'm making, to making the decision in flow or in balance, and then allowing the mystere of the money to follow. There has to be daily efforts. There has to be things that you do, but you're doing it in a mindset that's differently than what you used to. There's not an outcome of I need from the relationship as much as what can I do to help this scenario, and trusting that like it's in a big ethereal bank. If you're investing into your day and you're putting coins in that box by being who you can be, the best you can be with your family, your business, your life, the universe starts popping them out the other side and referrals and handoffs and opportunity. And it's not a mysterious thing. It's this idea of the law of, input and output. So it's just how we're viewing these laws and how we allow them to be in our lives. And if you leave a lane for that to happen, and you're not shutting it off as like, that's never going to happen to me, then you'll find that you're going to grow into a life sometimes that's going to feel even to you scary that you created that. You can't even believe you're there. And I want to segue for half a second. I'm sure along this way, you had some reservations and you had to pull back a little bit in your mind and like reassess what happened, and how did you deal with that to get yourself moving forward again and keeping yourself out of that corporate grind and into what you're doing and your passion?
Yeah, I guess an interesting part of the story is I founded my business in late 2019, started to get traction in February and literally the first week of March of 2020. And then we all know what happened in the second.
Yes.
So I couldn't have been getting going at a worse time. COVID really capitulated just as my new business was taking shape and just about to put me ahead of plan, frankly. And then I was set back for roughly a year and a half, I would say. So it required a fair amount of resilience, which is one of the dials I introduced in my TEDx talk. It required the mindset to believe. There are tremendous amount of challenges, plenty of reasons for doubt. And one of the questions I often get is, have you ever had any regrets? Did you ever have any regrets? And the reality is no. And that is because when you are doing what you feel that you are meant to be doing, and you have the mindset, then you know the light is at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel might be a little longer and darker than you had signed up for or wanted, but you know you can give yourself the staying power to get through it if you have the right mindset and develop that resilience. The key with the money thing is I kind of equate it to that famous analogy of a butterfly, right? If you're chasing a butterfly, they keep getting away from you. You're chasing them around the yard with a net, but if you sit quietly, they'll land on you, right?
Yeah.
Same with money. If money's the point, you're chasing money, there'll be a lot of friction. But if you know what value you have to add and you contribute that value, the money will come. And if
Oh,
you believe
wisdom.
that, you may not know how or when, but the money will come because the money is that butterfly. If you chase
Yeah.
it, it's going to constantly elude you. But if you contribute value and you find your audience where your value really has a unique contribution to make, the money will come.
Yeah. And it starts from within. This just keeps reoccurring in our conversation and others that when it gets tough, it's not about leaning on your community to get you through it as much as it is going within yourself and finding change and emulating that change. And a lot of times that's, that faith, like you said, that moves into a knowing. That's tough for people to see until you start creating some baselines around it where you can see like, oh, my emotional effort towards this has actually produced, less of a heart rate on a daily basis. I feel like, my body's working better because I'm not basically assaulting it every day with this stress level and this cortisol dumps that I'm putting in it. I'm finding small wins for my dopamine hits that I'm going to need to move forward. I'm developing a community around me that supports and rather than takes away. And, finding that mission within yourself is all the strategies that I as well went through the pandemic and had to peel back for a couple of years to get out the other side. And I could see that time as a great reset in the idea of how I was looking at things. I saw in the beginning, like I was the best at what I did, so why wouldn't you want to use my services? And I realized like that had nothing to do with the equation when I came out of the pandemic. It was about being there for each other. It was about finding solutions for the representatives in my events community that needed solutions and realizing like I had built pathways of relationships that would allow me to support this. And to give that or reinvest that back in has been nothing more than just the biggest joy because the outcome of it is just kept momentum and you're finding that your community brings you, back into the fold then. But it's definitely this internal work that needs to be done.
Yeah, could not agree more. And internal is the key. It starts from inside. Yeah.
Yeah. Finding your place, your language. So what's the next project? Talk to us about the book. What are you expecting to have come out of your book and are you out touring? Is there any big speaking engagements that you have coming up?
There will be some plans around that. The book is slated to come out September 2026. That is the idea. We shall see. I'm a little bit behind, but I did a tremendous amount of catching up. But as I was discussing with you earlier, I've had to scrap some things because I've reconceptualized some things that had a material impact on my current draft. But if you've seen my TEDx talk or anyone listening who has a chance to check out my TEDx talk, I start by talking about 3 dials to lead yourself, to lead you. Discipline, mindset, and resilience. And if you navigate those 3 dials, you can really determine your own outcomes. That is kind of the high end, idea of my TEDx talk. But I have a secondary concept. When you're tasked with leading others, it requires an additional set of dials. It's one thing to lead yourself and determine your own outcomes, but when you're leading other people, there's a higher litmus test and, some different requirements, I might say. So the second set of dials are integrity, empathy, and influence. So the book is really a 6 dial leadership system of all 6 of those: discipline, mindset, and resilience to lead yourself, and integrity, empathy, and influence to lead others, supported by some personal stories as well as some, historical figures that are icons of each of those dials to represent and show what good leadership looks like and how, 1 dial is not enough and the entire system needs to be working to have true leadership of character. You can lead effectively. You can determine your ends. You can determine the ends for the world. But if it's done without integrity, for example, then, that's not delivered with character. So
I
the
love it.
ultimate end result is an emotionally intelligent leader of character if you manage all 6 dials effectively. And that's kind of what the crux of it's about. I will be engaging in more speaking. I'm actually going to Nashville to work on some planning with some new partners that I have down there in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned. There'll be more to come on that.
Awesome. Well, it's been a wonderful time talking with you today, my friend. I can't wait to catch up when the book's published. I hope you come back and share with us a little more about how that career part of your life's going.
Absolutely. We look forward to that.
Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, John J. Lentini, both places. You can look for me at Crestcom, where I do most of my day jobs currently is leadership development with Crestcom International, who is a global leadership organization. So the best place to find more about my bio would be there, crestcom.com. I do have a website, but it's sort of under architecture at the moment.
As we all are, always
Yeah,
improving.
johnjlentini.com. You'll see me, but stay
Awesome.
tuned. That should be out in the next few months.
I'll have your contact us on the show notes. I appreciate you, brother. Hang on for a second. I'd love to talk to you after the show.
Sure. Sounds good.
Well, there we go. Another amazing example of the universe working in its magnificent way today. Appreciate you showing up and look forward to seeing you again at Leadership and Enlightenment.